Today's shir I'm dedicating to the 45 victims of the terrible tragedy that occurred in Miron on Thursday night, early Friday morning. Refuah shlema for those who are injured and comfort for those who are grieving. And I'm not only dedicating it, but I want to actually discuss it from a Tanya perspective. And no, I'm not going to be giving reasons for the tragedy, heaven forbid. But we're living in the time of the Omer, and the time of the Omer is a time that we focus on unity. And often we talk about we have to get along. I was just a second ago on WhatsApp, I was watching one of the fathers who lost a child, Mr. Chayot, Rabbi Chayot, describing and begging together with his wife for the country, for Israel to become united, for the Jewish people to become united. And unity is a very easy thing to talk about, but a very hard thing to grasp. But let's explore unity from a Kabbalistic perspective. What we're going to do today is we're not going to learn directly from the Tanya. We're going to learn one of the books that were written on the Tanya. In general, within Chassidut, within Hasidism, there are many, many books. Tanya is the first and most basic book of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who is the founder of the Chabad movement and who pretty much based the Chabad ideology on it. And after him, there were many of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren over many generations that expounded on the ideas of the Tanya. And one of the books that expounds on the idea is a book that was published about 120 plus years ago. And it explores unity. It's a full-on book that explores unity from a Kabbalistic perspective. And there's no way we could go through this book in one night, and maybe we'll continue dabbling it in the future. But I wanted to share with you the Kabbalah of unity in a way that maybe we've never learned before, and that will hopefully take an idea that's so cliche, like let's all get along, and actually help us understand it in a way that not only our hearts will resonate, but our brains will get it. So, before we go into the text, I have to give you some introduction. A few weeks ago, we spoke about the idea that God, when he shines his light into this world, he shines it through many different manifestations, through many portals. Hashem will shine it through chesed, kindness. He'll shine it through Furah, strength. He'll shine it through victory. He'll shine it through humility. This week in the Omer, we focus on the word Yesod, connection. Each way is a different way how Hashem shines his light. Now, the question is, each of these faculties, each of these powers, each of these personality types, how do they relate with the other? Are they at war with the other, or do they get along with the other? So if you've been counting the Omer, tonight we counted 36, you'll see that every day at the Omer we count another number, but we also count another Kabbalistic number. So tonight is Chesed Shebiyesod, kindness or love within connection, or connecting through love. In other words, what we're doing is we're combining the element of love and the element of connection. Tomorrow, we're going to combine the element of discipline and strength with connection. The next night, we're going to combine beauty and compassion with connection. The next night, victory with connection, humility with connection, connection with connection, and finally, royalty and dignity with connection. Now, we could talk about that forever, what each one of those 49 elements is. But the idea that is important to understand is you're taking forces that technically could be opposed, like kindness and discipline, courage and humility, and you're integrating them. You're forcing them into a relationship, and you're forcing a connection. How does that work from a Kabbalistic perspective? So let's explore some text together. Let me just say again, before we go into this text. This is heavy text. In general, what we do on this shir on Sunday night is, it's important for me that we get a taste of the real text. In other words, we don't only give the soft core version and the easy version, because maybe that talks to our heart and is inspiration, but it doesn't stimulate the mind. True knowledge has to challenge the mind. If you walk out of a lecture and it was too easy to understand, then you heard feelings, you didn't hear thoughts. There's no way to understand quantum physics without breaking your head on it. And so too Judaism. We have to get over the fact that all these ideas are just, simple, because it's not. Judaism has an incredible intellectual world. And here we go. So, in this text, we're talking about unity and hatred. We're talking about why, as Jews, we unfortunately fight a lot and how to get along. That's what this book that I quote. This is actually a translation that was published by my father's publishing house. My father, before he passed away, ran a publishing house, and now my brother took it over, and I'm on the executive of it. So what we do is we actually publish Hasidic texts in English, and this is one of the texts that we published actually very recently. Now, he says like this: baseless hatred and disunity that exists in people's heart is the direct opposite of the side of holiness. In other words, unity is holiness. Disunity is the opposite of holiness. Why? Because kiyadua, it is well known the principal difference between holiness and the sitra achra. Sitra achra is the other side, in other words, impurity. The fundamental difference between holiness and non-holiness is the bikdusha hu b'chinat achdut. That holiness is characterized by unification, by unity. V'zehu kol ikar yichud Hashem havaya. And this enables us to appreciate the uniqueness of God's name, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, the famous name that we all know, Adonai, and the fundamental oneness that it brings about, which we'll explore later on. In other words, God's name is the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. Each one of those four letters refers to another power of God. The Yud is Chachma, creativity. The Hey is Bina, analytic. The Vav is the various emotional faculties. The Hey on the bottom is Malchut, it's dignity, it's royalty. You're taking all the 10 various elements and you're combining it into the name of Hashem. Hashem, the name itself, symbolizes unity. This oneness is expressed through the unity and synthesis of the attributes of the intellect and emotive qualities as they exist in the realm of holiness. That might have sounded like Chinese. Let me explain. In the world of holiness and in the world of non-holiness, they have the exact same elements. In other words, if I right now took you on a tour to see the world of Kedusha, the spiritual Kabbalistic world of Kedusha, you would see 10 energies: creativity, analytical, the power of connecting with the idea, kindness, etc. Chachma bin adat, chesed, v'ur, tiferes, netzach, hod, yesod, malchut. If I took you to the unholy side, you would see the exact same 10. Remember, as a Jew, we don't believe that there's two gods in this world. There's one God, and this one God somehow created a world in which there's light and darkness, holiness and impurity. But what's the difference? It's the same godliness, and it's the same light that shines into both. So what is the difference that in the world of Kedusha and the world of holiness, these 10 turn into powers of holiness, and in the worlds of impurity, these 10 faculties, these 10 energies don't? The difference is unity. Synthesis. This is the magical word he uses. He doesn't use the word unity as much as he uses the word synthesis. In other words, chesed Kindness realizes that if I only have kindness and I don't have any self-discipline, I am lacking. And Gvura, discipline, realizes that if I don't have chesed, if I don't have kindness, I'm lacking. Or in a marriage, when the male and the female, the feminine and the masculine, each realize that one's not better or worse, I am great, and I need, or I become a better person when I have the other energy with me. Unity doesn't only mean to tolerate one another. Unity means to synthesize the other, to bring the other into your life. Because in the world of holiness, although there are 10 distinct sphirot, 10 different energies, comprising both of intellectual attributes and midot, emotive attributes, they are nevertheless unified and combined in perfect harmony. And that is by the influence of Hashem's light. It combines and unifies these elements into absolute oneness, allowing each one to appreciate how another can complement it. I want to give you an analogy. Imagine you're running a government, and you have different ministers. You have the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Medicine and Agriculture. In a competitive environment, in a dysfunctional environment, each person sees each other as their competitor, because you're fighting for agriculture and I'm fighting for medicine, and we're going to clash. In a functional environment, you don't see that as an opposing. You realize that a perfect society needs agriculture and needs medicine and needs education and needs a military, etc. But only when you realize that if you're only you without the other, you're imperfect, that's when you start appreciating unity. But when you think that the world only needs you, that only your skill set, if the world had only your skill set, everything would be fantastic, then there's no way to get along, because everybody's a threat to you. That person's talent, which you don't have, instead of you seeing it as a synthesis, as a complement, as a complementary energy to you, no, it's a threat. And you've seen it. If you've been in the workforce, if you've been in school, you've seen what happens when one powerful person is threatened by the other. It turns dirty, and often one or both of them have to leave. Why? Because the moment I'm threatened by your success, because your success is different than mine, at that moment, there's no way we could ever synergize. In contrast, the source and distinguishing trait of klipa's impurity is the opposite. It is specifically separation and division. Now, I'm going to skip here. And let me just explain what he was saying. What he was saying is the following. It takes an appreciation of how Hashem did not create any part of this world perfect to really appreciate unity. In other words, at the heart of unity is humility, saying, I'm not the be-all and end-all. There must be something I could learn from you. There must be a reason that I wasn't enough in this world, and God decided you had to be here. In klipa, in the other side, in the side of impurity, it's the other way around. I'm everything. So why are you here? You're just a threat. You're taking my money. You're taking my opportunity. You're taking my skills. Now, according to Kabbalah, before this world was created, there was another world was created. Not a physical world, not a world with, mountains and valleys and oceans, but a spiritual world. In other words, God created something outside of himself, so be it, In other words, he allowed some entity to exist, but that entity did not last. And only after the first experiment failed did God go create the second world. What was the first world that God created? If you open up the Torah in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, you'll see that the parasha starts like this. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Ve'haaretz, and the land. Haita, it was. Tohu, chaos. Vavo, an absolute anarchy. And then it continues. According to Kabbalah, what was that world that was chaos? That is the world that was created before God created the heaven and earth, Haaretz, and the land, Haita, was before that Tohu. There was a world of Tohu, there was a world of chaos that came before our world. What's the world of Tohu that was created before our world? The same energies of God. God shined 10 energies outside of him. In other words, he shined his light in 10 different ways. And he created a world. But he did not give these energies the awareness and appreciation of humility and appreciation to look at the others. And that's why, in the words of this discourse, in Tohu, in the original world, the midos, the emotive attributes, could not tolerate one another. Chesed, kindness, could not tolerate the trait of gvura, might, nor could gvura tolerate the trait of chesed. Each attribute in the realm of Tohu shone with full force, and hence it could not tolerate an attribute of a different nature. To use an example, there are certain people who see only their point of view. They don't have the capacity to see another person's perspective. Thus, a person whose character tends to kindness will always look generously on others and have trouble seeing their faults. When another person points out the need for caution, the kind person may argue with him. Conversely, a person who's overly critical will object and argue with those who challenge his judgment and advocate leniency. Similarly, each of the attributes of Tohu could only express their nature and could not understand or tolerate a different quality. And this reflects the well-known Kabbalistic concept of the shattering of the vessels. That's what happened. Literally, the world of Tohu exploded. Our sages state that Hashem built worlds and destroyed them. In Chassidut, it's explained that this refers to the world of Tohu, chaos, which preceded our realm, as we've been discussing. Our world is called the world of Tikkun, which is fixed. But the world of Tohu was destroyed in a spiritual cataclysmic event referred to as the breaking of the vessels. Literally, it was such intensity. Each of God's energies was so intense without the room for tolerance. It's like a community or a family of 10 strong-minded individuals, nobody willing to be flexible, nobody willing to see the other. It exploded like a family with, that has that kind of dynamic. In the words of Kabbalah, in the realm of Tohu, in the world of Tohu, the orot, which is the lights, the intensity of the light, were extremely intense and powerful. As a result, the various attributes did not bond and interrelate with each other. They were absorbed in their own self-expression and could not conceive of and had difficulty tolerating another attribute. This reduced their stability. In other words, let's pause for a second. A lot of information. Before God created a world, and we think this world is chaotic, but this world ultimately is not as chaotic. The proof is many people do live happily and united. There are many marriages that work. In a world of Tohu, there would be no space for any relationships because it's me and me and me. The world of Tohu is like a play school. Toddlers, a lot of emotions, no intellect, and unless there's somebody really controlling them, it's going to turn absolutely anarchy. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine. In the world of Tikkun, the emotions are much more subjugated and much more soft. The mind is much more in control. And there's much more synthesis, there's much more unity. In other words, we celebrate diversity, uniqueness, my truth. I'm living my truth. I had this interesting conversation with somebody recently about living their truth. I said, what, I think we mentioned it last week or 2 weeks ago. What if living my truth is going to hurt other people's feelings? In a world of tohu, that doesn't matter. It's my truth. I hate your guts. That's my truth. I think you're an idiot. It's my truth. I think you're ugly. That's my truth. But living like that is an intolerable world, even though you're claiming to be, I'm absolutely honest. Being totally kind without any sense of discipline, saying, you know what, yeah, I could throw money at you till you're stuffed in your face, but ultimately, let's figure out a better system for this. If you're kind without any moderation, it's dysfunctional. If you're totally disciplined and there's no flexibility, that's not moderation. If you're humble but you don't have courage, that's not moderation. If you're courage and you don't have humble, then you're just going to be a big shot who's going to, destroy their life. In other words, in this world, the world of Tikkun, we realize that no energy is complete without the energy of the other. And that's why in the Omer, we're constantly synthesizing. That's why in the Omer, which is a time that we focus on unity because the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died from disunity, it's dafka then in the time of the Omer that what do we focus on? On bringing together. Chesed shebahod, Yisod shebechesed, Gevura shebenetzach. For 49 days, we're bringing one energy into the other energy. We're facilitating a world of synergy. We're teaching ourselves to remember that no energy, no matter how beautiful it is perfect and balanced without another energy. Because that is the world that we live in, the world of Tikkun. The world of Tohu means chaos. The world of Tikkun means the world of fixing. How do you fix that world that broke? How do you fix the world which was originally created but then fell apart because it couldn't tolerate one another? By creating tolerance. How do you create tolerance? By synergizing with the other. And he says what happened is, after the vessel, after the world of Tohu kind of exploded, what happened to all that light? According to Kabbalah, all the light went and hid itself in the other side, in the side of darkness, in the side of Klippa. As a consequence, the shattered and the remnants, the sparks of Tohu, underwent a descent through the spiritual cosmos until they became clothed in the material substance of our physical world. And they became distant from godliness. And that's why, in this world that we live in, if you want to know where is holiness and you want to know where is not holiness, you need one perspective, one thing to look for. Is there unity in this place? Or is there disunity? Because by definition, if it's disunity, then it's being energized by the lights of the world of Tohu. And if it's unified, then you know that's the world of Tikkun. The fundamental self-orientation and intolerance that led to the shattering brought about the division that categorizes the other side. So let me spell it out. Both holiness and both impurity have God's energies. They're both incredibly holy. But why can I go eat something kosher and elevate it and make the world beautiful, and yet a piece of pork I can't? Because although the pork has holiness, it's being energized through a level of holiness that has no unity with it. And what's kosher and what's holy is united. And this is really the idea I'm trying to drill home in tonight's shiur. What are we saying? We're not just saying we have to get along. What we're saying is, if you don't get along, then it's not holiness. If your Yiddishkeit makes you self-righteous and less united, if you're a person who davens 3 times a day, but has multiple abusive relationships, then you're not in the world of holiness. Because holiness has no division. In the world of darkness, in the world of impurity, there's also God, but you're not on God's side. Because again, that energy of God is so hidden and it's so inaccessible for us that God actually says, stay away from there. Don't eat the pork. Kedusha, holiness, unity. Klippa, impurity, disunity. That is at the core of what he's teaching us today. And therefore, the single biggest enemy of Hashem is disunity. And he bases this on, we're going to read in a few weeks' time in the Parsha, we're going to read how just before Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, one of the final things Hashem told him to do is to fight the nation of Midian. And over here in this discourse, which is all based on that story, he asks, what was the big deal? Why did Moshe have to fight Midian? Why was it one of the last things that Moshe has to fight? And he explains that the word Midian comes from the word Madon, which is fighting. And he says the ultimate enemy of God is disunity, fighting, more than any other nation. And that's why this is the one war that Moshe had to wage. And it's the one war that's called God's war, even more than the wars that the Jews fought when they came into the Holy Land under Joshua. This war they had to fight under Moshe, and this war is called God's war. Why? Because they were fighting disunity. At the core of everything evil is what he explains in this incredible essay. I could send it to you if you want, or you could buy the book. At the core of this incredible essay is this one idea that he's trying to drive home. The enemy of holiness is disunity. And the synonym for holiness is unity, synergy. He uses a word a lot, hitkalalut. Hitkalalut means integration, synthesis, bringing together. And he explains that although when the Jewish people came into the Holy Land, they had to fight 7 nations. And according to Kabbalah, the 7 nations are the 7 emotional attributes. But from the other side, so kindness that comes from the dark side, and Vura that comes from the dark side, etc. But those are all individual attributes that had to be fought, and those could be fought by Joshua. But Moshe had to fight the ultimate fight before that, the fight against the father of all negativity, and that is Midian, division. And the biggest proof that division is the single biggest issue is the fact that when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, when the first temple was destroyed, how long did it last for? 70 years. What was the first temple destroyed for? For the sin of idolatry, adultery, and murder. And how long was the destruction for? 70 years. The second temple, there was no idolatry, no adultery, and murder, which are the three cardinal sins that you have to give your life up rather than commit. And yet, it's 1951 years later, and the temple hasn't been built. What was the cause of the second temple's destruction? Sinat chinam, baseless hatred. Think about that. This exile has lasted more than almost 30 times as long as that destruction, as the original exile. And our sin was so much smaller. They didn't get along, big deal. We were doing the right things. We weren't committing adultery. We weren't killing. Why? Because God is willing to forgive details, but he doesn't forgive the fundamental. And that is when we lose the plot and we move over to the other side and when we have disunity. And that's why the Yetzer Hara, the temptation of disunity, is the single biggest temptation. It permeates us. There's such a strong tendency to be judgmental of one another, to hold faribles, to be angry, to be self-righteous. Even the best of us, even those of us who sit there saying, yeah, I'm very pro-unity, we know how hard sometimes it is to be unified. We know how certain people really get on our nerves. It is the ultimate challenge of life. It really is. The proof is that we're in this exile for close to 2,000 years and we're still not getting it right. We're still fighting one another as if we haven't learned any lessons. I mean, look at Israel. 4 elections, we can't put together a government. And that's just in a political perspective. But the disunity, the hatred from one group to another, and yes, when there's tragedy, we all come together. Unity means to realize we need each other. If all the world was Haredi, that wouldn't be okay. If all the world was Mizrahi, the world wouldn't be okay. There's something the Haredi brings, there's something the Mizrahi brings, there's something the non-Orthodox brings, and there's something we all bring to the table. And until you don't see the Jewish world as a world of tikkun, a world of many energies, but each one that brings more light into this world, obviously when channeled correctly, you're living in a world of chaos. You're living in the world of Tohu. And in the world of Tohu, there's my truth and that's it. I'm the only truth. And anybody who disagrees with my sets of priorities lost the plot, because I am the definition of truth. Really? How do you know? Your conviction is so strong, and you cannot understand why nobody sees the world the way you do. But who says you're right? Besides the fact, you yourself have changed in the last year. You don't see the world the way you did a year ago. None of us do. It's impossible. Each day you see the world a bit differently, unless you're a total nutcase and total radical, that has no flexibility in thought. So if you are changing your ideas every day, how do you expect me to keep up with your ideas and know and agree with you every single day based on where you're at? And I think, I started the shiur that we're dedicating this to the 45 victims. Yeah, it's the most tragic peacetime tragedy that Israel has had since the establishment of the state and even before. 45 Jews killed not by terrorists, not by earthquakes, but by human mistake. We don't know what the mistake was, and it's not for me to cast blame. But when these things happen, you ask yourself a simple question. What is God telling me? And you don't know the full answer, but here's one thing you do know. Every single message that God sends us is one thing: make the world a better place. And the one thing that God's been asking us to make the world a better place through is unity. He's been asking it for 1951 years. Become united, get along, get closer, forgive, don't be variabled. Create space in your heart for the nudnik, for the person who's not on the same social status as you. Create space in your heart for the other. Create space in the heart to believe that maybe you don't have the monopoly on truth. Only when I'm willing to accept that I don't have the monopoly on truth, that I only know what resonates with me. But just because it resonates with me doesn't mean it's true. It just means it resonates with me. I sent a podcast out last week. Not everything that's true is inspirational, and not everything that's inspirational is true. In other words, just because something feels good doesn't mean it's right. Most of us, we like our ideas because they make us feel good. So anyone who doesn't agree with us, how could you? But who says your ideas are right? Have you put your ideas under a microscope? Have you really dissected them? Have you sat across a person who challenged them from an intellectual point of view, and you were willing to actually go deep into your ideas and not get defensive about it? When was the last time you really interrogated your ideas and actually said, maybe I'm wrong? Maybe the way I'm raising my kids is not necessarily the best way. Maybe the values I'm bringing into my home isn't necessarily the truest way. So how can we walk around preaching that everybody has to become more like me and that anyone that's not like me is not with it, when I myself don't even know what I stand for or have not really worked it through? The humility of the world of Tikkun is to say that, yes, I am searching for my truth, but my truth and your truth don't have to clash heads. They don't have to butt heads. There are multiple truths in this world. And what I mean is, obviously, there's certain things that are just true and other things that are false. But what resonates with me, for example, if I resonate with being a Hasidic Jew and growing a beard and raising my family in a relatively insular environment, and that's my truth, and your truth is no, I'm much more modern, flexible, nuanced, integrated in the world. If you and I could realize that none of us have the monopoly on the truth, and there's space within God's world for both our points of view, then you could continue raising your kids your way, and I could continue raising my kids my way, and both of us are not opposing forces. Me doing something different than you is not a threat to you, and you are not a threat to me. There could be multiple truths in this world. There could be multiple ways of serving Hashem. Avraham was kindness, Yitzchak was discipline, and they were not opposing forces. In a marriage, one spouse could be more the intellectual, one could be the emotional, one could be the pragmatic, one could be a bit more abstract. And the moment they stop seeing each other as threats, but rather as complementary, that's when they build a synergized world. That's when they move into a world of tikkun. Unfortunately, many of us go into relationships in our lives, but we're still in the world of tohu. What's the world of tohu? Immaturity. It's me. What's the definition of maturity, of immaturity? That me, the world is about me. What's the definition of maturity? That there's a space for the other. The moment I am able to create space, and in this discourse, it explains that comes from the mind. When the mind is able to control the emotions and the mind's is able to say, hey, there's space for you, there's space for me. That's when you achieve maturity. That's when you can build an enduring relationship. But if you're in an emotional space and you're in a self-centered space and you're in a narcissistic space where there's only you and your emotions, there's no chance you'll build an enduring relationship. Because in the world of Tohu, there is no relationships. There's a time to live in Tohu. Teenagers are Tohu. Teenagers are single-minded, no nuance, no subtlety, radical thoughts. As the good old statement goes, if you're not a 20 if you're not a communist at 20, you have no heart, and if you're still a communist at 30, you have no brain. At some stage, you grow out of it, but at some stage, you're in the world of Torah, and that's why we don't marry 15-year-olds off. Not only because they're ashamed they're so young, but because they're unable to. They're not in the headspace to create space for another. Some of us in our early 20s already, and some of us, it takes us, unfortunately, much longer until we're actually able to say, it's not only about me. And it's not about bringing unity to the Jewish world. I've given up on that. It's not my mandate in life. I don't think I'm going to bring unity to 14 million people. But here's what I could do, and here's what you could do. In your Jewish world, bring unity. Minimize the variables in your life. Minimize them. Take them down a notch. Clean up some of the bad energy. At least in your universe, it should be a world of tikkun, not a world of tohu. Maimonides tells us that each and every one of us should see ourselves as standing next to a scale where the good and bad are unequal. And all it takes is one action, one word, or one thought that could tip the scale. We don't have to necessarily bring unity to the Jewish world. We have to bring unity to our Jewish world. And that could be enough to tip the scale. Imagine we could get, all 17 of us, can get rid of some of the condescending or hatred or grudge that we have towards other people in our lives, and just let it go. Dedicate it to the 45 victims. And Le'ilui Neshama, to elevate their soul. You are bringing unity in your life. Again, it doesn't mean you have to become everyone's best friend. It doesn't mean you have to go out for coffee with people who are not your energy type. But you'll have no grudges against them. My heart is lighter. My heart is softer. Literally, do a bypass on your heart, because our heart is clogged with so much resentment. We need a quadruple bypass to just allow the heart to feel again, to love again. It's too entangled with, I'm faribbled with this person because of that, and I'm faribbled with that person because of that, and that person gets on my nerves, and I can't stand that, and I can't stand that. Let it go. Clear your heart. Don't create a bottleneck in your heart. Allow the blood of love to flow. And in that way, we bring true Eloi Neshama, an elevation of the soul, to these 45 special Neshamot. And perhaps, we could actually bring the world towards its ultimate goal, the real tikkun, olam, the real completion and fixing of this world, and the real united world with the coming of Mashiach.